What do you know about politics? What should you know? Forget views, beliefs, and opinions. Politics is really a science, and that's where we come in. Welcome to Inside Political Science. I'm Kirby Goodell.
I'm Todd Kent, and we're your guides to what's actually happening in politics. We're using our years of experience to navigate political data, media, money, behavior, and more to educate and inform you.
The holidays are here, but the politics never stop. Welcome to episode 19 of Inside Political Science. I'm Kirby Goodell. I'm here with my colleague Todd Kent, and we're ready to talk about some politics. Todd, the first thing, though, I wanted to talk about, maybe a little disconnected from our normal conversations, but this survey that came out, they asked across generations people what it required to be financially successful, and Gen Z gave an astronomical from my standpoint. They said in order to be considered financially successful, kind of odd language, they needed $587,000 in annual salary.
Yeah, that's you think through that. How could you come up with that number? One, it could be lack of experience and not being out in the real world. But and hopefully they're not looking to the government to kind of create an economy where that's possible, or they're going to be sorely disappointed. So it is interesting to see this kind of expectation.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about the importance of the economy in terms of political voting. What are the objective economic standards? What does the economy look like if we're talking about unemployment rates and inflation rates? And then what do people feel? What do they experience? What do they live in their lives? One of the things that's super interesting about Gen Z is they're more conservative than the millennials that came before them, especially when we talk about economics, and this may help to explain why. They have different understanding of what it requires to be successful and what they need in order to have the sort of life that they want to live. And so they may be more conservative than the previous generation.
That's true. And I think future politicians are going to have to take this into account, that this group is a little bit different than maybe the ones that preceded them. They're better savers. Some of them are foregoing college because they said it's too expensive. So there's this idea economically and so I think as you look towards kind of what do you look for out of the government? What do we mean by a good economy anymore? It may change, because is it more just how my daily life is, or really what I can afford in the future?
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about this. We noted that Trump made inroads among younger voters, as he did kind of across the board in terms of different population groups. One of the things that I hope that this helps to lay to rest, maybe for all times, but the temptation may be too great for pollsters and pundits and political scientists, is this idea of demography is destiny. So when Obama was first elected in 2008, and then when he was reelected in 2012, there were these arguments that the young people were now Democrats. They would remain Democrats. They were more liberal than previous generations, and sort of the future was a Democratic majority that would rule for 3 decades or more. But we don't see that. And the thing that I think as political scientists that we often get annoyed by this type of thing is it creates this idea that parties don't respond to political realities. They're constantly responding to what's going on in the environment, and they don't just sit still and say, oh, okay, you won.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We as soon as the election was over, we talked about whether there would be some reflection on what happened. Maybe we don't see it maybe out loud as much, but I tell you, I can guarantee you it's going on behind the scenes, because you cannot sit there and say we're just going to lose in the future. And so what happened? And you see this tremendous, I read some columnists say that diversity was the winner in this election, because you saw just a diverse group coming to support Donald Trump, almost unprecedented. That he was able to move numbers, because these were demographic groups that people said, well, those are Democrats, and they'll always be Democrats. Mm-hmm. And so I think it changes the kind of the political strategy.
Yeah, and if you compare the Republican Party in 2012, the Mitt Romney party that lost to Barack Obama, to the Donald Trump coalition in 2024, It's just remarkably different. It's hardly the same party. It's hardly recognizable as the same political party. And the Democratic Party has shifted at the same time and has changed in ways, maybe because they took those younger voters for granted.
No, I agree, and I think what you're doing, back to your point, I think it's exactly right, and that is that political parties are not going to sit back and say we're happy with losing, and so they're going to try to figure out what's going on. I love the story of former Alabama football coach Nick Saban, his team was, they always dominated, had the best offensive line, and they would run the ball, and then all of a sudden other teams were opening up the offenses, and so to get the good players and to compete there, they became a passing team.
Right.
And I think that's exactly what we see in politics. We're gonna see the Democrats respond in a way. What's it going to take to reshape our core constituents and win elections?
Yeah, and it's not clear. So sometimes parties respond in a very positive way. Sometimes they respond in a negative way. And by positive and negative, I mean in terms of expanding their base. Sometimes they learn the wrong lessons. Sometimes they learn the right lesson. And it's not clear what the Democrats are going to do. Nate Cohn of the New York Times has an interesting piece out today where he says that the mistake is to assume that the Democrats' only problem was voter turnout. This is common because Harris didn't win as many votes as Joe Biden did in 2020, and so a lot of people are going, oh, if we just turn those people out. And Cohn has some pretty interesting evidence saying, no, if those people had turned out, there's a good chance they would have voted for Donald Trump. There's a reason they weren't turning out for the Democratic Party.
Yeah, the idea that people were able to persuade them that something different, voting different, was going to be better. And also I think we always talk about the smart things that the Trump campaign did was one of them is they recognized that there were more votes among their kind of solid base out there that were leaving on the table, and they were able to get them out. Yeah. But they were able to do that, I think, through talking about issues that mattered to them.
Yeah, and really hitting on the economy. Well, the big news we have to talk about it is Joe Biden issued a pardon for Hunter Biden after repeatedly saying that he wouldn't do it. Absolutely would not. He didn't even leave. It wasn't like wiggle room. Like, let's wait and see what happens. When he's been asked over time, again and again and again, he said, no, won't do it, won't think about it. I trust the justice system. And then on his way out the door, he's like,
yeah,
free Hunter.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe we saw family politics dominate national politics in this situation. But it is interesting. And I think that less surprising is the fact that he did it. More surprising was how strong he was in his denials that he was going to do it throughout the campaign. And maybe thought he was going to win, or the Democrats were going to win, and that it would change the kind of the calculus. But this looks out there like kind of left the party hanging a little bit.
Yeah, and it's a really broad pardon. Like, we can talk about some pardons are very specific, and they say, we're pardoning you for this particular crime. Now, remember, in order to get a pardon, you have to be guilty of it. Well, you have to have committed a crime. Maybe you haven't been found guilty, and you don't have to have been tried yet in order to have a pardon. But in this case, the pardon was very broad. It says basically from 2014 until present for any of his work with in the oil fields and any of his work with foreign governments. It's all right off the table now. And
I think that is going to be the issue that going forward is people can continue to refer to that obviously the Biden family was covering up things that happened by why else would you take the pardon back to 2014 and not just make it a narrow pardon with what he was convicted of?
And It's interesting the reaction, the partisan reaction to this, and tell me if you think I've mischaracterized it. On the left, people are very upset about this because they feel like the criticism that they had of the Trump administration, their argument of we're the party that has taken the moral high ground, we're the party that believes in justice, we're the party that believes in the justice system, and Biden by doing this has undermined that. And then on the right, I think it is like, oh look, yeah. Biden agrees with us. The justice system is corrupt, and that may empower Trump in terms of his efforts to reorganize, take control of the Department of Justice, bring in a new head of the FBI, all the different things that he's been talking about. Biden sort of gives some credibility to those claims.
No, I think he's made it harder for the Democrats to do some of the things politically that they would want to do against the Trump administration, continually pointing back to the fact that Donald Trump was convicted, and was awaiting sentencing when he becomes president. All these things that go out there, it kind of takes the power away from that argument from the Democrats. It's interesting to me. I don't know if that was the Biden calculus or not, that he was going to kind of let the Democrats know that they treated him poorly or what. But we certainly. I think that's going to be the end result, is that it's going to be harder for the Democrats to take that legal approach.
Well, a lot of people like the idea of term limits on politicians. I may be taking this in a direction that maybe I shouldn't, but I sort of see this as an argument for why you don't want someone in office who is no longer accountable to the voters. So Biden is partly able to do this. People will say, well, what about his legacy? Well, his legacy was that he came in and he won in 2020. He thought he was the only person who could beat Donald Trump, and he did. And then coming into 2024, he thought he could win again, but the Democrats forced him out because it was pretty clear he was not going to win. What was his legacy going into that? And so he's no longer affected. He's no longer accountable to the voters. It's not clear what his legacy is, so he can. Why not do this? I try to think about why would a president on his way out, whose family is facing legal jeopardy, they're going to continue to face legal jeopardy. The Trump administration has strongly signaled that they're going to continue to go after Hunter Biden and Republicans in Congress. Take it off the table.
No, I think that's exactly the kind of the political calculus that was made, that we can get rid of this. What does it matter? And in 10 years from now, will anybody even remember that this happened? And this is a short-term maybe problem, but it's certainly going forward for the Biden family. It certainly eases their situation.
Yeah, if our listeners are playing trivia in a decade from now and a question comes out about Hunter Biden and this pardon and they get it right, I will applaud them. I think the idea that this is sort of a defining moment of politics, it's a nice statement. It reflects sort of the biases that we have when the media are so 24/7, they're so focused on the now. I don't think this amounts to a whole lot in terms of the historical record. He pardoned his son. We also know that previous presidents have also pardoned family members. Trump pardoned Jared Kushner's father, so he pardoned an in-law. Bill Clinton pardoned his brother Roger Clinton. It is a little different because there is this question about whether Joe Biden was in some way involved or some way benefited from some of the activities that Hunter Biden was involved in. But it's not unusual for family members to benefit from presidential power.
And, if you think about it, other than the ones you mentioned, I mean, if you look at the number of pardons and commutations of sentences, Barack Obama exceeds all other presidents, maybe added together.
Yeah.
But we still, probably sitting here, we can't remember anybody that actually he pardoned or commuted their sentence without doing some research.
Right.
And so I think you're going to see that this too will go away over time, and I think it's a short-term problem for the Democrats, but over a long term, I think we see it dissipate.
Yeah. And there's also this question about the pardon power, which I think is really important for people to think about. Why do presidents have this power? It was seen as in the constitutional founding. One, it was already there. Governors had it. The English monarchy, the English political system had a pardon power that was available. So it just seemed like a natural extension to put it into place. There was some question about whether president should have it. Alexander Hamilton, one of the founding fathers and authors of the Federalist Papers, made the argument that it should be absolute. And that president should not be limited. There was some question about whether to place some congressional check if it was involved treason. But George Washington early on used the pardon power in order to pardon some of the people involved in the Whiskey Rebellion. So early on you have rebellion, you have a revolt, and in order to bring peace and to not further inflame, he says, we'll use the pardon and we'll let these people come back.
Yeah, I think we're at the point now in our history where it doesn't surprise us at the end of a term in office. You talked about term limits and how when you're term limited, you begin to say, look, I can take the risk with my legacy. I can build on it, or I can do something. But we do that, and I think you see that at the end when a president is not going to be in office anymore. We see more action taken in these areas because why not?
Yeah, and of course the one pardon that we all remember is Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon. When he did so, his approval dropped about 20 points, I think almost overnight. I'd have to go back and look at some of the polling, but it was clearly an unpopular decision. He decided it was good for the country to move on from Watergate. And it kind of makes you wonder, and maybe Biden should pardon Trump. Maybe he should have pardoned Trump right away when he became president. It would have cost him politically, but maybe...
Yeah, I think if early on he said we're not going to go there, we're not going to have our politics take place in the courts. I think in some way, I think that would have maybe had some bipartisan support. Although the true believers would say that that's bad, but and I look back to when you look at presidents that seem to have reached across the aisle in some way, I think that history will show that they gained support over time.
Yeah, and it's unclear. You may have more faith that it would have worked out in his favor, but I do think it might have helped move the country beyond some of these debates about whether the justice system has become polarized and whether this is the sort of political system that we want to live in. And I think it might have been an opportunity that was missed. Even today, maybe he could pardon Trump on the way out, though I think then it would be I think if he did it now, it would be seen mostly as a poke in the eye.
Right. And yeah, exactly. Well, if you'd done it early on, what it does, it actually would have taken off the table this Trump, continual attacks about I'm going after somebody.
Yeah.
I'm going after somebody. And maybe that would have taken off the table a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that's it for the Quick Bites. When we come back, we're going to do a deep dive into presidential honeymoons and talk about what Trump can do during his honeymoon. And actually, I guess even if he gets a honeymoon on his second marriage.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll be back.
Hi, I'm Greg Kot.
And I'm Jim DeRogatis. We host Sound Opinions, the world's only rock and roll talk show.
Jim and I review records and give the music news, and we also bring in bands for unique live performances.
I'll never forget when the young Chicago garage rockers, the Kathy Santonis, joined Weezer's Rivers Cuomo for a completely unrehearsed set.
I wanna go back! Yeah! Wow, you guys pulled that off.
Sunday afternoon at 1 on Aggieland's Public Radio, KAMU-FM.
Cyril, it's snowing.
Well, you just look at that.
We are planning something rather special.
Lights, music.
There's such a lot for you to see.
Have you ever had that feeling? You're exactly where you belong.
Stream classic Call the Midwife specials with PBS Passport, leading up to an all-new holiday special on Christmas Day.
Welcome back. We're ready to talk about presidential honeymoons and whether they still exist. We've been teaching political science for a really long time. And I think when I started and probably when you started, we really emphasized the presidential honeymoon. The presidential honeymoon. It's so critical to the success of a presidential administration. Is that still true?
Well, if you look at the numbers, it seems less and less true over time. I think there's some kind of correlation with this partisanship that we see, this polarization. And there used to be a lot more, there was a little bit of goodwill as the president came in. And you can, if you look at the history of the presidents and their job approval, they tended to start above 50%, which means that over half the voters, even probably people outside your party were saying that, they thought he's doing a good job, or they're excited about his presidency, and then over time it begins to decline. We're seeing where people actually start their presidency below 50%. Yeah. And I think that's the difference.
Yeah, I was looking at some of Trump's numbers before we came in, and I was curious to see. I had the sense, just sort of from reading some of the numbers, that his approval had gone up, and it has. But he is still under 50%. But he went from sort of low 40s to high 40s, and it's separate point. It's funny reading the different media outlets in terms of how they cover it. Some of them, Trump's still below 50%, has bumped, but he's still below 50. Others are Trump approval soaring to 46%. Yeah. Wow. But there is this. Once upon a time, there was this sort of feeling after an election that I didn't vote for this person, but they're my president, it's my country, and I want them to succeed. And that was even felt some among partisans, right?
No, I think you're right. I think there was this that generation that we need to respect the office of the presidency, and we want him to succeed, to do what's best for America. We're seeing. And so at that time, if you look at historical numbers, I think up till 2004, the average approval rating for a president was 53%.
Right.
Okay. Now we're seeing the average approval rating for a president below 50. And so I think it matters less than it used to. It used to, if somebody came into office and they were at 48% or 47%, we would say, what's wrong? And now we say, that's just normal.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing, and Trump is especially notable for this, I think, is very low ceiling, very high floor. He doesn't tend to drop very much. So on the flip side of presidents not coming in with a lot of support is there's also seems to be a bottom that most of them don't go below, because no matter what they do, they're not going to lose the support of their core, their base voters. And so, and this is especially true of someone like Trump.
No, I think that's true. In fact, over the last 4 years, no matter what Trump has said or done, his numbers don't change. And so even the day that he was 39 counts, indicted on 39 counts, his numbers really didn't change at all. And so I think it's gotten to a point where you really look at these numbers. If you'd say Trump at 47, you'd say, well, if the Republican Party is 33% of the electorate, then those must be independents and maybe a few Democrats that are getting them to 47. And that's actually not so bad.
Well, and so part of the logic with the honeymoon, too, is that if a president was smart, and they came in and they had a really clear issue agenda, they should focus on their most important stuff first and not get distracted. And that would help for them to maintain support for a longer period of time, because we know over time the approval is going to start high and it's going to fall. And as approval falls, they're going to have less success with Congress. And so there are lots of other problems that come from that. But is that still the case? Do presidents need to worry about hitting the ground running on the first 100 days? Does that still even matter?
We'll see. My feeling, if I was to be the advisor for the Trump, the Trump administration, I would say, look, you've identified, 2 or 3 areas that are very important to your voters, that actually brought voters across the line to you, that you should set out an agenda and give it a timeline over the next year that you're going to work on these things. Because what happens is you set expectations so high, and people say, he's going to close the border, he's going to fix the economy, he's going to do all this stuff. Well, the problem is those take a long time. And they're difficult issues. And so what you do is to set expectations better. I think what we do is we overpromise, underperform. Every president does that. Say, I've got a mandate to do all this stuff. Well, you don't really, because you have a Congress who has their own power. And so, maybe take a different approach.
Yeah, one of the things that I was really surprised about, in terms of the Democratic campaign this year, is when immigration we knew immigration was going to be an issue because the Biden administration did relax a lot of the rules and a lot of the restrictions that the Trump administration had in place, and that led to a huge infusion of immigration. That was Biden's problem of his own creation. But the sort of rhetorical thing that I was wondering if Democrats would ever employ, which they didn't, was, didn't in 2016, didn't you promise to build a wall? Shouldn't that wall have kept people out? Because what he ultimately did was he didn't actually make that a priority. He made tax cuts a priority, and he was successful in terms of his early agenda in terms of getting tax cuts free, but he didn't turn to the wall until the very end of his presidential administration. That's one of those things about picking your – now, I'm not saying what he did was the wrong thing, but you have to pick your priorities.
You do, and so that's why I think going forward to be successful – is you pick those that you can win on, and then you argue that you've done it. And I think that we're in Texas. If you think back to when George W. Bush was governor of Texas, he had a very limited policy kind of scope that he really wanted to focus on. And then at the end of the thing, he said, "I promised you this, and I did this. Reelect me." And I think that's what Trump should focus on, those areas where he can make some headway and give us a timeline, because there's going to be opposition, strong opposition, and so I think saying you're going to get something done in the first 100 days is very difficult. But go ahead.
No. One of the fascinating things about the Trump administration, though, and is especially coming in as he's talking about imposing tariffs, and on day one putting a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, our allies, right? Not even, and then also talking about other potential tariffs on the BRICS countries, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and Saudi Arabia, I think. Anyway, talking about if they try to move outside of the U.S. dollar as a currency, doing 100% tariff, that he is, whether he's serious about it or not, and what I mean by that is does he really want to put tariffs in place? Or does he want to threaten tariffs in order to make sure that people understand that if you have access to U.S. markets, which are incredibly valuable to foreign countries, you might have to pay a price. You might have to come to the negotiating table. Is it a negotiating strategy, or is it a serious policy proposal?
Well, my feeling is that's the way Donald Trump negotiates.
Yeah,
he sets up this standard and says this is what's going to happen to you. He gives the punishment first, and but the problem is when you put tariffs in place, somebody here is going to be hurt, and you begin to hurt your own kind of progress because of some of that. So you have to be careful where you put the tariffs in. But that being said, even between the end of the campaign or the election day to now, we see world leaders coming to Mar-a-Lago to visit with him because they're concerned about this. They're interested in whether it's a negotiation strategy or not, because it does matter. The United States is a huge trading partner around the world.
Yeah, I sort of suspect, and I do think this makes sort of, when we're talking about the honeymoon period and the other things about the Trump administration, a little trickier, because sort of our classic view would be Trump's going to come in, he's going to work with Congress, he's going to impose tariffs. And with those tariffs, that's his economic policy. That's the way he's thinking about economic policy. But I think he's really using this as the negotiating lever. Come in, threaten tariffs, try to bring people to the table, be able to negotiate better deals, and hopefully have a stronger economy as a result of that, including more domestic manufacturing, and then claim that the tariffs worked. We didn't have to impose them because I successfully made these deals.
It's interesting. He's been using the words that we haven't really heard for a long time, and that is trade deficit.
Yes,
kind of focusing on this number that where we're exporting versus importing, and it was interesting that we really haven't heard that much in the last 4 years. We haven't much. Trump kind of talked about renegotiating some of the trade treaties when he was president before. So it's interesting to hear that language again. And I read where the president of Mexico said, "Look, we've stopped a lot of the people coming into your country from our country," and I think she wanted some credit for it.
Yeah.
And so I think there's some angst among leaders with Trump using that strategy.
Well, and it also seems like it translates outside of the tariff idea too. I mean, he's come out and he said, "Hamas, you better release those hostages before I come into office." And we don't know what he's going to do, but clearly the threat is there that he will do something and that he will be unpredictable and that he's going to strongly support Israel. So now is the time, if you want to negotiate, if you want a better negotiation, you need to act.
Right. Yeah, it reminds me of as Carter was leaving office and Reagan was coming in.
Yes.
The Iranians released the hostages after 444 days, and so it was kind of this idea that we don't know what Ronald Reagan's going to do, and some say point to that as why they released him. Maybe we're seeing the same thing with Trump. And
it may be. I think the broader point is that I think. Historically, when I've thought about honeymoon periods and presidential success, I think about legislative success. I'm not sure that's how Trump thinks about his success. It may not be bills passed. It may not be policies enacted through the House and the Senate. It's through his ability to bring people to the table and otherwise affect outcomes.
I think some leaders see themselves as kind of they're here to administer the government, to manage it. I don't think Trump sees himself that way at all. I agree with you. If you look at success, and especially if we're going back to the kind of the honeymoon, the job approval world, where I think I go back to Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
When Bill Clinton started, the day he started in office, he was actually pretty high, had a few early missteps. His numbers dropped, and then he had some of the scandals. But then after the Republicans took the House in 1994, his numbers began to climb.
Yeah.
And I think in part because he showed a willingness to work across the aisle. Mm-hmm. There was some significant legislation that needed to be reworked, and that was welfare in America. And he with the help of the Republicans, was able to do that. And his numbers, and he ended up being his ending numbers were as high as almost any president in history. I mean, so his was one of the few presidencies where his numbers increased over as he went into his second term and ended it. So the question is, can Trump find something that the Republicans and Democrats can agree upon? Because you see if you think back to Affordable Care Act, no Republicans voting for it. Mm-hmm. And then you see the Trump tax cuts, no Democrats voting for it. So it's been a long time since we've found an issue that the Republicans and Democrats can agree upon.
Yeah, and Trump does, because he's this unconventional politician. He at least has the capacity maybe to do something a little bit more unpredictable than some politicians. And I like the Bill Clinton example, because Clinton does come in. I think almost all the standard explanations of Clinton is he overreached early, he got distracted, he was doing issue of the day types of stuff, his approval went down. The 94 elections were a complete disaster for the Democrats. and everyone was writing Clinton off, and Clinton did something really, I think, very cool. He said, wait a second, I can live in this environment. What I'm going to do is I'm going to triangulate on policy. I'm going to put the congressional Democrats to the left of me, the congressional Republicans to the right, and I'm going to be the honest broker in the middle, the force of moderation in American politics. And voters really responded to that. And so, he jumped on welfare reform. He jumped on a crime bill. Now, later, some of that became controversial because of some of the consequences of that legislation, especially among the progressive left. But at the time, it was an amazing comeback in terms of a presidency.
Exactly. I think, and so that kind of, as you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, because Donald Trump is not running for office again.
Yeah.
And so now he's thinking about legacy. How much will the idea of setting a legacy going to change kind of governing actions?
Yeah, and he may be thinking about how he can reset. Now one thing that I think is presidents don't want to get distracted early on. We think of it as them we think of their approval rating less as their approval rating and more as the political capital. And so a president has money in the bank basically to spend on things to get things done. Trump is, at first glance, seems to be sort of careless with his political capital. He throws out Matt Gaetz as a possible leader of the Justice Department. He's got now a controversial pick for the FBI to replace his own FBI pick, which means that pick has to step down because they have set number of years in terms of their terms. But so he has Kash Patel and he's made, even when Gaetz steps down, he replaces her with Pam Bondi, who's got her own love. It's an interesting sort of approach because in a traditional political science setting, I would say, oh, wait, he's distracting, and this is going to hurt him because he's going to lose support. But I'm not sure that's the game I want him to play the traditional political game, and he's not playing the traditional political game.
No, I would agree. There's a economic theory that's been adapted into politics called prospect theory. The idea that there's some reference point, and if you're below that reference point, then you're willing to take risk.
Yeah.
And I've always kind of looked at presidents. That reference point was 50% approval.
Yeah.
But since I think he's become comfortable with having this 46 to 48% approval, and nothing, doesn't believe that anything is going to take him below that, so he's willing to take a risk. He's not. There's no excess capital there.
Yeah.
You say if his approval rating was 53, you'd say he'd have 3% to spend.
Right.
But I don't think that's in his calculus.
Well, the other thing is we talk about presidential success is coming in the legislative agenda, but the legislative arena, but it also is really important in terms of control of the administrative state. Now, Trump likes to call it the deep state, but what we really mean is the big, massive federal bureaucracy. And I think one of the things that the other game that he is playing is a signaling game where he's saying, look, Matt Gaetz may not be confirmed, but I'm going to take control of the Justice Department one way or the other. And so career civil servants in the Justice Department, please take notice. And a lot of them have. Some of them are retiring. Some of them are moving out. Some of them are looking for private sector work. But I think his appointments, if we think about them as not in terms of a distraction because he's putting people up who are going to be controversial, but rather a signal to those bureaucratic agencies that he's coming, that he wants to control what they're doing and how they're doing it because he sees that as critical to his own success, it's a way different strategy.
No, you're right. I think one way to understand Donald Trump is that he is a big signaler. You know what I mean?
Yes.
He really is. He likes.
I like that.
You know what I mean? That it's a different way where you think of the traditional negotiation. We come in and we talk it out. That's not the way he does it. So he sets his flag in the middle of the field and say this is the starting point. And so it is very interesting. Therefore, he's willing to. I think you said it earlier that he likes the chaos. He likes the fact that he makes a pronouncement and it causes all kinds of issues out there. That's the world that he likes. And if there wasn't chaos, he would create some.
Yeah, when everybody else feels like things are in chaos, he seems to be more comfortable, right? He seems to be like, oh, this is okay. And we could talk about other reasons that he might be trying to do it, but again, sort of once upon a time, many years ago when I taught the presidency, it was first you come in, you have this high approval, you try to get legislative policy because that's your legacy, and then scholars started noticing, well, there's also this other thing going on, which is control of the administrative branch, so you need an administrative strategy. And the early way we taught it was you start legislatively and then you move to the administrative branch when you no longer have capital to spend on legislation. I think increasingly what we've seen over time is presidents come in with a legislative strategy and an administrative strategy. And this isn't just a Donald Trump thing. I think you can see it with Barack Obama. You can see it with, we can go back and talk about George W. Bush. And it's part of issuing executive orders. It's part of appointment processes. The idea is that the federal bureaucracy and the rules they make matter a great deal. And so we need to control that.
No, I think you're right. And the whole idea of a legislative strategy has been kind of skewed over the last few administrations because where you have a unified government, where the same party has the presidency, the Senate, and the House, we haven't seen that many instances of it. Mm-hmm. And so, and even now that Trump's, command of the House or the Republicans' command of the House is so small that one or two defections, all of a sudden you have divided government. So the idea that you don't hear talk about the legislative strategy like you used to, and a lot more of it is we see kind of the administrative approach where executive orders and stuff to make decisions.
Yeah, and you sort of layer on top of that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy coming in to be, I guess it's not an agency, but they're calling it the Department of Government Efficiency, and part of their job, as I read it, is less about efficiency, though I don't discount that they may be looking for efficiency in terms of fewer government regulations and cutting staff and other types of things that they'll be investigating, but it's really about political control.
Yeah, and it was interesting. They actually set an end date for what they were going to do. Do you see that? So I think of 1 year, somewhere in the middle of 2020, July of 2026, something like that, where they're going to set an end date. But it really is. It's a way to reset. The things that they think that Donald Trump kind of brought to the table, and let's reset the government. We're going to get rid of the deep state in a way. We're going to quit spending so much money. We're going to make some fundamental shifts in the way things happen. And I think they're going to find it sounds good right now, but there's going to be more opposition than we think.
Yeah, but it is you can be a little. So I heard someone compare this to back to Bill Clinton. It seems like we end up back at Bill Clinton a fair amount. But when Bill Clinton came into office, he put Al Gore in charge of a commission to reinvent government. And I was listening to someone talk about this and say, that wasn't very successful. What did it do? Well, actually, at the time, it did help reinvent government somewhat, because one of the Clinton arguments was, we can't have, if we don't make sure that government is being efficient and being responsive and doing what it is intended to do, we can't do the things that we want to do. So we have to restore people's trust in government. We have to convince them that the government is being efficient. And so I sort of see this in a similar light. Like, maybe there are possibilities that they will. I think it's possible they could. Maybe it's accidental, but I do think it's possible they could do some good, because government does waste money, and it is inefficient in a lot of places. I think sometimes that's overstated, but there are places, and paying attention to government processes can improve outcomes.
No, I actually think it's a winning message. The fact you got two Well, Vivek, who ran for the Republican nomination, but you've got Elon Musk, who's undoubtedly the most important businessman in the world.
Yeah.
On this committee that's going to head up this effort, but it's a winning message, and because most every human in the United States thinks that there's probably government waste.
Yeah.
I mean, they hear that the federal buildings are empty because everybody's still working at home since the pandemic. Whereas they have to get up and go to work every day. So even if you're a Democrat, you go, yeah, I kind of agree with that. So I think that it is a winning message, and can it translate into something where people go, yeah, that was a good result.
Yeah, and so certainly the possibilities are there. When I used to do regular surveys, one of the questions that I always like to ask people, now this was about state government in Louisiana, but how much of every dollar do you think is wasted? And it was always right at 50 cents.
Yeah,
which there were similar questions that were asked about the federal government. So people believe that there is a lot of waste in terms of the federal government, in terms of the state government. And they're not wrong, though. I also always like to point out one of my favorite quotes about government waste is one person's waste is another person's critical investment, right? One person's pork is another person's steak, right? And so I think that's one of the challenges with sort of identifying waste. What I view as waste, you might see as critical government spending.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if this group, if they focus, can they really focus on trimming the deficit?
Yeah,
and because that's a very difficult process, and it's painful.
Yeah, and
is Donald Trump willing to allow the U.S. to go through that pain? Because he does. I still think that he wants to believe that he's succeeded.
Yeah.
And so the opposition is going to be strong to some of these cuts.
Yeah, one of the things about Trump that I think is interesting is he clearly believes he's one of the greatest presidents we've ever had, and so I think he will be attuned to his legacy. Now, I don't know what that means.
Right.
in terms of what he will do, but I do think that's interesting. Now let's go back to the honeymoon though idea. You're advising Trump. It's day one. What do you want him focused on?
Well, I think you go for one. You need to set out a clear agenda. Two, you need to focus on some areas where you can get some quick wins. Whether that's to get deals with Canada and Mexico that they're kind of immigration or illegal immigration coming across the border so you can point to that.
Yeah.
But I think he needs to have a quick win with the economy.
Yeah.
Now the problem is, how do you do that? Maybe if you can, we heard drill, baby, drill. But if you can reduce the cost of a gas at the pump, that's a good way to do it. If you can reduce the cost of the supply chain, so maybe groceries go down. These type of things where you can point to it.
Yeah.
And then keep talking about it. But I think he does need some short-term wins to people say, give me time over the 4 years, we're going to get a lot done. Yeah,
I think the things that are most clearly within his control are the arguments about the ability to come in and at least threaten tariffs, and the ability to come in and try to do something to control immigration and the border, and he's got people in place, and I think he can signal there. On both of those issues, you run the risk of going too far. If you go too far on tariffs, I think you create an inflation problem. I think if you go too far on immigration and controlling immigration, you have a separate inflation problem, and also other problems that you create for the economy. But as we know, sometimes it's what you actually do and whether it's successful, and sometimes it's whether what you do can be perceived as having been successful and controlled a problem. And I agree with you. He needs to come in and show that he's taken control and he's controlling these issues. He was elected for 3 reasons: inflation, immigration, and trade.
Yeah, and like if you take the immigration issue, there's no way you can deport 10 million people.
No.
There's not enough transportation to do that. But what you can do is to say, we're going after those that have been convicted of a crime. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so it's a signal to the American people that we're doing what we told you we were going to do. We're starting there. and I think that's what's got to happen. And I think the honeymoon goes away really fast when you overreach. Because I think presidents feel like, look, I won the election, therefore I can do whatever I want.
Right.
And that's actually not true, because when you begin to make policy decisions and policy pronouncements, some people are going to drop off.
Yeah.
Because you did something that hinders their daily life. And so presidents have to be a little more focused and a little more careful.
Yeah, and we talked about the Trump second marriage part of this, where he's coming into a second term. Normally, you think a president who comes into a second administration is a little wizened, maybe doesn't have quite as much, and so they're a little more careful in terms of their promises. I think given the way that Trump won again, I think he feels like he has an even bigger mandate than ever. And so the danger for him is overreach, getting distracted, not staying focused on the things that really matter in terms of what he promised and what he said he would do.
I kind of get the feeling that he believes that some of his problems in the first administration was a people problem. Yeah. He had the wrong people in the wrong places. Other people. And so I think now that he's a little wiser, putting people in there, and so there's a lot more emphasis on loyalty than there was in the first administration, and we'll see how that works. But I think there's this idea that it's hard for presidents after you run for 18 months and you won an election to not think that, hey, they want me to do something.
Well, we're going to keep paying attention to this. We're going to keep watching it, because politics doesn't stop, and we don't stop paying attention to it. We're watching it all the time, and we're excited to be back at the beginning of the new year to talk again.
Inside Political Science is a production from KAMU, Aggieland's Public Television and Radio. For more information, visit tx.ag/Inside Political Science. Have a question for our experts? Email them at insidepolicy@tamu.edu. Also, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss a new episode.